When that phone rang and the Russian words slipped off her tongue before she could stop them, the air in the room didn't just change, it froze. She didn't know it then, but she had just signed a contract with the devil. And the devil drives a Rolls-Royce. Rain lashed against the blackened windows of the Gilded Lily, a members-only lounge in downtown Chicago that smelled of old money cigars and secrets. It was 100 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of hour when only the guilty or the lonely were still awake. Camilla Evans adjusted her black vest, feeling the familiar ache in her lower back. For 3 years, she had been Camilla. Just Camilla. The quiet girl who poured scotch with a steady hand, never made eye contact, and disappeared into the shadows when her shift ended. She wasn't pretty enough to be a trophy, nor loud enough to be a nuisance. She was invisible, exactly how she needed to be. "Refill, now." The voice was low, rolling like thunder over wet pavement. Camilla didn't flinch. She grabbed the bottle of Macallan 25 and moved toward the corner booth, booth 4, the blind spot of the security cameras. 3 men sat there. 2 were built like brick walls, their suits straining against thick necks. But the man in the middle was different. He was leaner, sharper. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Camilla's entire existence. He had dark hair swept back and eyes the color of shattered ice. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his phone, his thumb tracing the screen with a lethal sort of patience. This was Nikolai Draken. Even in her hiding, Camilla knew the name. Everyone in the underworld knew the name. He wasn't just a mob boss. He was an institution. He moved logistics oil and weapons across borders as easily as Amazon moved packages. Camilla poured the amber liquid, careful not to let the crystal bottle clink against the glass. Don't look at him. Pour. Walk away. Just as she began to turn, a shrill vibration buzzed against her hip. It was her burner phone, the one only one person had the number to. Her sister barely hanging on in a hospital in Queens. Panic spiked in Camilla's chest. It was 1:00 a.m. If the hospital was calling, it was an emergency. Without thinking a fatal error born of pure terror, she pulled the phone out. She intended to reject the call, but her thumb slipped on the cheap screen. The call connected on speaker for a split second before she jammed it to her ear. "Irina Onis des, Oni nashli menya." Irina. They are here. They found me. The voice on the other end was frantic, whispering in a dialect of Russian specific to the southern border regions. It was a dialect of thieves and exiles. Camilla's heart stopped. Her instincts, buried under 3 years of serving drinks, roared back to life. She snapped a response before she could catch herself, her voice dropping an octave, losing the flat American accent she had perfected. "Molchi, niczego nie govori, ja peredzwoniu." "Shut up. Say nothing. I will call you back." The Russian flowed out of her sharp, authoritative, and perfectly native. She hung up instantly, her hand trembling. The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla slowly looked up. Nikolai Draken was no longer looking at his phone. He was looking at her. The air in the booth felt sucked out, replaced by a heavy, suffocating pressure. The 2 bodyguards had shifted their hands, moving subtly toward the inside of their jackets. But Nikolai raised a single hand, stopping them. He studied her. He didn't look at her name tag. He looked at her eyes, her hands the way she stood. He was dissecting her. "Camilla," he said, reading the cheap plastic tag on her chest. His voice was smooth, devoid of the harsh accent usually associated with his kind, but the cadence was there. That was a very specific dialect. Rostov. Camilla's throat went dry. I don't know what you're talking about, sir. I just listen to language tapes, trying to learn. Language tapes, Nikolai repeated. A corner of his mouth twitched not a smile, but a glint of amusement. Tapes don't teach you the slang for shut up used by the Voriv Zakon. Camilla gripped the empty tray tight enough to turn her knuckles white. I have tables to clean. Enjoy your drink, Mr. Draken. She turned on her heel, violating the first rule of survival: never turn your back on a predator. She walked fast, fighting the urge to run. She felt his eyes on her spine, burning like a laser sight. She made it to the kitchen, dumped the tray, and stripped off her apron. I'm sick, she told the manager, pushing past him. I'm leaving. She fled out the back alley into the rain. She threw the SIM card from her phone into a sewer grate and ran. She didn't go to her apartment. She went to a 24-hour locker at the bus station where she kept a go bag. She thought she was fast. She thought she was smart. But as she sat on the cold metal bench of the Greyhound station at 3:00 a.m., clutching her bag, she realized the terrifying truth. Men like Nikolai Draken didn't just let curiosities walk away. She wasn't Camilla anymore. She was Irina, and she was in deep trouble. The bus to Indianapolis was delayed. Of course it was. Camilla sat in the corner, her cap pulled low. She had $4,000 in cash, a Glock 19, wrapped in a t-shirt, and a passport that said she was Canadian. At 3:15 a.m., the automatic doors of the station slid open. The change in atmosphere was instant. The sleepy hum of the station died. 2 men walked in. They weren't police. They wore tailored raincoats over suits. Camilla recognized the bulge of shoulder holsters. They scanned the room with military precision. They weren't looking for a bus. They were looking for her. Camilla stood up, moving toward the women's restroom, looking for a window to crawl out of. Miss Evans, a voice called out. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the PA system. She stopped. She turned slowly. It was the head of security from the club, a giant of a man named Stephen. He stood 10 feet away, hands open, showing he wasn't reaching for a weapon. We don't want a scene, Camilla, Stephen said. The boss just wants to talk. I have nothing to say to him. Her hand inched toward her bag, toward the zipper where the gun lay. Stephen shook his head. If you touch that bag, the 3 men outside will come in. And unlike me, they aren't polite. Plus, he held up a phone. On the screen was a live video feed. Camilla squinted. The blood drained from her face. It was a hospital room. Queen's. Her sister's room. A man was sitting in the visitor chair, reading a magazine. He waved at the camera. Don't. Camilla whispered the word, strangling her. Then come with us, Stephen said. The car is warm. The flight is scheduled. Flight. Mr. Draken hates Chicago in the rain. 10 minutes later, Camilla was in the back of a Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows thick enough to stop a .45 caliber round. She wasn't handcuffed, but the child locks were on. They drove in silence to a private airfield on the outskirts of the city Chicago Executive Airport. The tarmac was wet and slick with oil. Floodlights illuminated a beast of a machine sitting on the runway. It wasn't just a plane. It was a Bombardier Global 7500, the pinnacle of long-range private aviation. The tail number N1KD was painted in subtle matte gray against the black fuselage. It looked like a shark waiting in dark water. The engines were already spooling a high-pitched whine that vibrated in Camilla's chest. Stephen opened the door. "Up the stairs, Miss Evans." Camilla stepped out into the wind. The jet blast whipped her hair around her face. She looked at the stairs leading up to the lit cabin. This wasn't an abduction. This was an extraction. But for what purpose? She climbed the stairs. The interior of the jet was warmer than most apartments she'd lived in. The cabin was configured with the Nuage seating collection, cream leather seats that floated on magnetic bases. The carpet was deep pile wool. The lighting was amber and soft. Nikolai Draken sat in a club seat, facing the door, a crystal tumbler of whiskey in his hand. He had changed out of the suit into a black cashmere turtleneck and dark trousers. He looked more dangerous, comfortably dressed, than he did in the armor of a suit. He gestured to the seat across from him. A bottle of Louis XIII cognac sat on the table between them, alongside a small plate of dark chocolate. "Sit," Nikolai said. Camilla didn't sit. She stood in the entryway, her go-bag still over her shoulder. "You threatened my sister." "I ensured her safety," Nikolai corrected. "There is a difference. The man in her room is a former Spetsnaz medic. She is safer now than she has ever been." "What do you want?" Nikolai took a slow sip of the cognac. "I checked your background, Camilla Evans, born in Ohio. Parents died in a car crash. Waitressing for 5 years. Clean record." He set the glass down. The sound was sharp. "It's a very good forgery. Almost perfect. But the NSA couldn't crack the encryption on the ghost file you're actually part of. Someone spent a lot of money erasing you, Irina." Camilla stiffened at the name. "The plane takes off in 5 minutes," Nikolai said, glancing out the window. "We are going to Paris." "I'm not going to Paris with you." "You are. Because at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow, I have a meeting with the head of the Volkov Bratva. A man who trusts no one. A man who speaks a very specific dialect of Old Russian. A man who will kill me if he suspects I am lying." Nikolai looked up at her, his eyes locking onto hers. "My translator was found dead in his apartment 2 hours ago. I need a voice. I need someone who knows the code of the thieves. I need you. And if I say no, then you can get off the plane." Nikolai shrugged. "And I will call my man in Queens and tell him to leave. And whoever you were running from when you picked up that phone, they will find your sister within the hour." The engines roared louder, the pilot signaling readiness for taxi. Camilla looked at the door. Then she looked at Nikolai. She knew the world he operated in. She knew the Volkovs. If Nikolai was meeting them, he was walking into a lion's den. She dropped her bag on the floor. "If I do this," she said, her voice hard, "you get my sister into a private clinic in Zurich, under a fake name. Paid in full for a year." Nikolai didn't blink. "Done." He kicked the ottoman toward her. "Sit down, Irina. Wheels up in 2. As Camilla sank into the leather seat, the Bombardier lurched forward. She watched the lights of Chicago blur into streaks of gold. She had spent 3 years trying to be a nobody. Now she was drinking cognac on a $60 million jet with a man who could kill her with a phone call flying toward the very people she had run from. The drama was just beginning. At 45,000 feet, the world below was nothing but a void of darkness. But inside the Bombardier Global 7500, the air was thick with the scent of roasted duck and expensive cologne. Camilla, no. Irina stared at the reflection in the dark window. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. She was trapped in a metal tube, hurtling at Mach 0.90 toward a city she hadn't seen since she was a child. "Eat," Nikolai said. He hadn't touched his food. He was reading a dossier on a tablet, his stylus tapping a rhythmic, irritating beat against the screen. "I'm not hungry." "I didn't ask if you were hungry. I told you to eat. Your blood sugar is low, your hands are shaking, and you look like a fugitive. Which technically you are." He swiped to the next page without looking up. "Volkov smells fear, like a shark smells blood. If you walk into that room shaking, he will kill us both before the appetizers are served." Camilla picked up the silver fork. She stabbed a potato. "Who is he?" "Really?" Nikolai finally looked up. His eyes were tired, framed by dark circles that hinted at the insomnia of a man who slept with a gun under his pillow. "Viktor Volkov. He controls the flow of rare earth metals out of Siberia. But he's old school. He believes in the thieves' law, the code you grew up with. He doesn't trust contracts, he trusts blood. And he thinks I'm trying to cheat him on a shipment of coltan sitting in a warehouse in Marseille." "Are you?" "Of course I am," Nikolai said, his face deadpan. "But he can't know that until the money is in my account." He stood up and walked to a closet near the cockpit. He returned holding a garment bag, stamped with the logo of Saks Fifth Avenue. He tossed it onto the seat next to her. "Put this on. You can't meet Volkov wearing—" He gestured vaguely at her diner clothes. "Polyester and grease." Camilla unzipped the bag. Inside was a dress. It wasn't just a dress. It was a weapon constructed of emerald green silk. It was an Alexander McQueen, structured yet fluid, modest enough to command respect, but cut to draw the eye. "There's a changing room in the back," Nikolai said, returning to his whiskey. "And Irina. Do something with the hair. You look like you just ran out of a burning building." Camilla grabbed the bag and retreated to the aft lavatory. It was larger than her bathroom in Chicago. She stripped off the waitress uniform, shoving it into the trash bin with a sense of finality. As she pulled the silk up her body, she felt a strange transformation. The fabric was cool against her skin. It forced her to stand straighter. She found a makeup kit in the Vanity Chanel untouched. She applied red lipstick, darkening her eyes with liner. She pulled her messy hair back into a severe, sleek chignon. When she looked in the mirror, Camilla was gone. Irina was back. The daughter of a man who used to cut fingers off for lying. She walked back into the cabin. Nikolai stopped mid-sip. He didn't say anything for a long moment. His gaze traveled from her heels to her eyes, lingering not with lust, but with calculation. He was assessing her value. "Better," he said quietly. "Now the rules. You are not Camilla the waitress. You are Katerina, my external consultant for Eastern European logistics. You speak when I tell you to. You translate exactly what he says. If he uses slang, you clarify. If he threatens me, you don't flinch. You smile." "And if he recognizes me?" Camilla asked, sitting down across from him, crossing her legs. The silk rustled softly. "Why would he?" Camilla hesitated. She poured herself a glass of water, her hand steady now. "Because my father wasn't just a low-level thug, Nikolai. My father was Dmitri the Butcher Ivanov. He was Volkov's right hand until he stole $3 million and fled to America." The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the hum of the engines seemed to vanish. Nikolai stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a cold smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a gambler who just realized he was holding a royal flush. "Ivanov," Nikolai whispered. I thought he was a myth. The man who vanished. He didn't vanish. He died of a heart attack in a trailer park in Ohio, working as a mechanic. He changed our names. He told us never to speak Russian again. Camilla gripped the glass. If Volkov knows who I am, he won't just kill me. He'll skin me alive for my father's debt. Nikolai leaned forward, the predator in him fully awake. Then we have a problem. Or we have an opportunity. How is my death an opportunity? Because Volkov respected your father. He hated him for the theft, but he respected the ruthlessness. If he suspects who you are, we don't deny it. You're insane. I'm a businessman, Nikolai corrected. We use it, but only if we have to. For now, you are Katerina. But if the gun comes out, you are the daughter of the butcher. Do you understand? Camilla looked at the man who held her life in his hands. She realized then that Nikolai Draken was worse than the Volkovs. The Volkovs were wolves. They killed because it was their nature. Nikolai was a chess player. He would sacrifice his own queen if it meant checkmating the king. I understand, she said. Good. Nikolai checked his watch. Try to sleep. We land in Paris in 2 hours, and I need you sharp. He turned off the overhead light, plunging the cabin into a twilight gloom. Camilla closed her eyes, but she didn't sleep. She fingered the silk of her dress, feeling the ghost of her father standing behind her, whispering in the dialect she tried so hard to forget. Paris was weeping. A grey drizzle blanketed the city, turning the cobblestones into slick mirrors that reflected the street lamps. The convoy consisted of 3 black Mercedes-Benz G-wagons. Camilla and Nikolai were in the middle vehicle. They bypassed the customs line at Le Bourget, money-greased wheels that diplomacy couldn't touching, and were speeding toward the 16th arrondissement. Nikolai was on the phone, speaking rapid-fire French. He looked calm, but Camilla noticed his hand was gripping the door handle tightly. Change of plans, he said, hanging up. The meeting isn't at the hotel. Where is it? Camilla asked. She was staring out the window at the Eiffel Tower, looming like an iron skeleton in the fog. The catacombs. Camilla whipped her head around. The tourist attraction. There are parts of the catacombs tourists don't see. Private chambers. Volkov is paranoid. He thinks the CIA has bugged the Ritz. He wants to meet underground. Literally. The cars slowed as they entered a nondescript alleyway in the 14th arrondissement. A heavy iron gate opened automatically. The G-wagons descended a steep ramp into a subterranean garage that smelled of damp earth and gasoline. Earpiece, Stephen said from the front seat, handing back a tiny, flesh-colored device. Camilla placed it in her left ear. It connects to a recorder in my pocket, Nikolai explained. If anything happens to us, the audio streams to a cloud server. My associates know that if the stream cuts out, they release Volkov's financial records to Interpol. It's our insurance policy. Does Volkov know that? He suspects it. That's why we're still alive. Nikolai opened the door. Showtime, Katerina. They walked through a heavy steel door, guarded by 2 men holding AK-74U rifles. The men patted Nikolai down thoroughly. When one reached for Camilla, Nikolai grabbed the man's wrist. His voice was low, pleasant, and terrifying. She is not carrying. Touch her again, and you lose the hand. The guard looked at Nikolai, then at his partner. He stepped back. They descended a spiral stone staircase. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of limestone and bone. They were entering the Empire of the Dead. At the bottom, a long tunnel stretched out, lined with skulls arranged in intricate patterns. It was macabre, silent, and imposing. At the end of the tunnel, a chamber opened up. It was lit by hundreds of candles, and a few battery-powered industrial floodlights. In the center of the room sat a long, antique wooden table, looking entirely out of place. Viktor Volkov sat at the head. He was a massive man, his face a landscape of scars. He wore a shearling coat over a tracksuit, the uniform of a man who didn't need to impress anyone. Behind him stood 4 men, silent and still as statues. Nikolai walked forward, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Camilla stayed 1 step behind him to his left. "Viktor," Nikolai said, spreading his hands. "A bit dramatic, isn't it? Even for you." Volkov didn't smile. He stared at Nikolai. Then his eyes shifted to Camilla. His gaze was physical, a weight pressing on her chest. He spoke in Russian. The dialect, thick guttural, filled with slang from the Rostov prison yards. "Why did you bring a whore to a business meeting, Draken?" Camilla felt a spike of rage, but she kept her face blank. She waited. Nikolai looked at her. "Translate." Camilla cleared her throat. She looked Volkov in the eye. "He asks why you have brought a female companion to a discussion of such importance." Volkov's eyebrows shot up. He laughed a dry, barking sound. "She polishes the words nicely. I called her a whore. He says I have a diplomatic way of phrasing his insults," Camilla said calmly to Nikolai. Nikolai nodded. "Tell him I brought you because his English is terrible and I don't want any misunderstandings about the price." Camilla turned to Volkov, switching back to Russian. "Mr. Draken respects you too much to allow a language barrier to cost you money. He wants clarity." Volkov grunted. He motioned to the chairs. "Sit." They sat. The negotiation began. It was a dance of numbers. Tonnage shipping routes, bribes for harbour masters in Rotterdam. Camilla translated back and forth, her mind working furiously to filter the aggression, but keep the meaning. 20 minutes in, the tone changed. Volkov leaned forward, pouring himself a shot of vodka. He didn't offer one to Nikolai. He spoke to his lieutenant, standing behind him in a whisper that was meant to be unheard. It was rapid, incredibly obscure slang. "The second the wire transfer hits, put a bullet in the American's knee. We take the girl. She has a pretty mouth." Camilla froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Nikolai looked at her, noticing the pause. What did he say? This was the moment, the twist. If she translated it, Volkov would know she understood the deepest slang, the thieves' whisper. It might reveal her background. If she didn't translate it, Nikolai would be kneecapped in 5 minutes. She looked at Nikolai. She saw the trust in his eyes, or perhaps just the expectation of competence. Camilla turned to Nikolai and spoke in English, her voice steady, but her eyes screaming a warning. "He said that the liquidity of the transfer is a concern," she lied smoothly. "He wants to verify the funds before we leave." Then she reached under the table and gripped Nikolai's thigh hard. She dug her nails into his expensive trousers. 1 tap, 2 taps. Danger. Nikolai didn't flinch. He didn't look down. He kept his eyes on Volkov, but his jaw tightened. He understood. "Tell him," Nikolai said, his voice dropping a few degrees, "that I am happy to verify funds, but I prefer to do it from the car. The signal down here is unreliable." Volkov narrowed his eyes. He sensed the shift. The predator in him woke up. "You don't leave until I see the screen," Volkov growled. "And tell your girl to stop looking at me like she knows me. It's unsettling." He stared at Camilla. He was studying her face, peeling back the layers of makeup. "You have eyes like a ghost," Volkov murmured in Russian. I knew a man with eyes like that. A traitor. Dmitri Ivanov. The name hung in the damp air between them. Camilla stopped breathing. Volkov stood up slowly. He pulled a heavy pistol from his waistband and placed it on the table. Who are you, girl? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. And don't lie. I can smell a lie, like I can smell piss in a gutter. Nikolai's hand moved toward his jacket, but the guards behind Volkov already had their weapons raised. The click of safety catches disengaging echoed through the chamber. Camilla looked at the gun. Then she looked at Volkov. There was no way out. The lie was dead. She stood up. The silk dress flowed around her, like armor. She dropped the submissive translator act. She dropped the American accent. She stood the way her father had taught her to stand, shoulders back, chin high, showing no fear, even when death is staring you in the face. She looked Volkov dead in the eye and spoke in the rawest, dirtiest dialect of the Rostov yards. I am the daughter of the man who saved your life in '98 when the OMON raided the warehouse. I am the daughter of the man you swore a blood oath to protect. She slammed her hand on the table. I am Irina Ivanova, and you owe me a debt, Victor. Volkov's mouth opened slightly. The room went deadly silent. Nikolai looked at her, and for the first time since she met him, he looked genuinely impressed. But Volkov didn't lower the gun. He stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. Then a slow, terrible grin spread across his scarred face. Ivanov's brat, he chuckled. I wondered where you went. He picked up the gun. He pointed it not at Nikolai, but directly at Camilla's heart. My debt was to your father, Volkov said softly. And your father is dead, which means I owe you nothing. The hammer cocked back. The barrel of the pistol was a black eye staring unblinkingly at Irina's chest. The air in the catacomb chamber felt too thick to inhale, saturated with the smell of ancient dust and imminent violence. Irina didn't move. 3 years of hiding, of jumping at shadows, had burned away her capacity for panic. What remained was the cold, hard core her father had forged in her. She looked past the gun, straight into Volkov's eyes. Then pull the trigger, Victor, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but perfectly steady in the silence. Show your men that the word of a Volkov is worthless, that the blood oath you swore to the man who took a bullet for you means nothing, because he had the bad manners to die. Volkov's eye twitched. It was a microscopic crack in his armor. In their world, reputation was currency. To break a sworn oath even to a dead man was bad business. It made you look weak. It made you look unreliable. Nikolai saw the hesitation. It was the opening he needed. He didn't reach for a gun. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He set it gently on the table screen facing up. You're right, Victor, Nikolai said it smoothly, ignoring the 4 automatic rifles aimed at his head. Debts to the dead are tricky, but debts to the living, those are very real. Volkov flicked his eyes down to the phone. It showed a live GPS tracking map. A small red dot was blinking rapidly. What is this Draken Moor games? It's a geolocation beacon, Nikolai explained as casually as if discussing the weather. It's currently broadcasting our exact position to a private contractor team sitting in a van 3 streets over. If my heart rate monitor connected to my watch stops, or if I don't enter a fail-safe code in exactly, he checked his watch, 45 seconds, they don't call the police. They detonate the charges they placed at the tunnel entrance while we were talking. Volkov's guards shifted uneasily. The only way out was the way they came in. You would bury us all, Volkov snarled, lowering the gun slightly. I'd rather die in a cave than let you cheat me, Nikolai said coldly. You tried to order my execution in a language you thought I couldn't understand. You insulted my intelligence. Now we have a stalemate. You can kill us, and we all rot down here. Or you can lower your weapon, we finish the transfer, and we all walk out. Volkov stared at Nikolai with pure hatred. He was a brute force operator, caught in a technological vice. He looked at Irina, then back at the phone. 30 seconds remained on Nikolai's mental clock. Slowly, agonizingly, Volkov lowered the hammer of his pistol. He placed the gun back on the table and slid it toward Nikolai. You fight dirty Draken, Volkov spat. I fight to win. Nikolai picked up the gun, ejected the magazine, and pocketed it. Irina, the laptop. Irina moved. Her legs felt like jelly. But she walked to Nikolai's side, opened his slim leather briefcase, and set up a satellite-connected laptop. The transaction took 3 minutes. It felt like 3 years. The guards watched them like hawks. Volkov drank vodka straight from the bottle, his eyes burning holes into Irina. Done, Nikolai said, turning the screen to show the confirmation code. 50 million deposited in your Cayman account. Volkov grunted. Get out, before I change my mind about being buried alive. Nikolai stood up, offering his arm to Irina. She took it. His muscles were coiled tight as steel cables under his suit jacket. They backed out of the room past the guards and into the tunnel of skulls. Walk fast, Nikolai murmured. Stephen is waiting at the top. They hurried through the macabre corridor. They were 50 feet from the spiral staircase when the shot echoed behind them. It wasn't aimed at them. It was a signal shot. Run, Nikolai yelled, shoving Irina forward. Volkov had decided to take his chances. The tunnel erupted in noise. Bullets chipped the limestone walls around them, sending razor-sharp shards of rock flying. Nikolai grabbed Irina by the waist and practically threw her up the first few steps of the spiral staircase. He turned, drawing a sleek Sig Sauer P226 from a holster at the small of his back that Irina hadn't even known was there. He fired 3 controlled shots back into the darkness. A cry of pain echoed from below. Go, Irina, don't look back. She scrambled up the dizzying stone stairs, her breath tearing in her throat. The silk dress ripped, catching on the rough stone. They burst out through the heavy steel door at the top. Stephen was there, holding a suppressed MP5. He fired a burst down the stairwell to keep Volkov's men back, then slammed the heavy iron door shut and threw the deadbolt. Car, now! Stephen barked. They sprinted to the waiting G-wagons. The engines were already roaring. As Irina dove into the back seat of the middle car, Nikolai stumbled right behind her. He fell more than sat, landing heavily against the leather upholstery. Go! Nikolai shouted at the driver. The G-wagon peeled out of the underground garage tires, screeching on concrete, narrowly missing the closing security gate. Irina sat up, gasping for air. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her shaking uncontrollably. They were alive. She looked at Nikolai. He was leaning back against the seat, eyes closed, his face pale in the passing streetlights of Paris. His breathing was shallow and wet. She looked down. His hand was pressed tight against his left side, just above the hip. Dark, viscous blood was seeping between his fingers, staining the charcoal wool of his suit black. Nikolai, she whispered, reaching out. He opened his eyes. They were glassy with shock, but still intensely focused on her. "Welcome back to the family business, Irina," he rasped, then grimaced in pain. It seems the negotiations went a little over budget. The safe house wasn't a basement. It was a penthouse apartment on Avenue Fourche in the prestigious 16th arrondissement overlooking the Bois de Boulogne. It was sterile, modern, and built like a fortress with bulletproof glass and private elevator access. Stephen carried Nikolai out of the elevator. Nikolai's face was grey sweat beading on his forehead, but he refused to pass out. "The master bath," Stephen instructed Irina, kicking open a door. "It's set up for this." The bathroom was cavernous, all white marble and chrome. But instead of luxury bath products, one counter was laid out like an emergency room. Trauma bay, saline bags, suture kits, trauma dressings, adrenal injectors. They laid Nikolai on a large, leather-covered bench in the center of the room. Stephen immediately began cutting away the ruined suit jacket and the cashmere turtleneck beneath it. Irina stood back, her hands shaking. The smell of copper and sweat filled the room. "I need you to be useful, Camilla," Stephen snapped, using her fake name, the stress breaking his usual calm. "Hold pressure here while I get the lidocaine." Irina stepped forward. She looked at the wound. It was a through-and-through shot in the fleshy part of his side, lucky it missed major organs, but it was bleeding heavily. She pressed a thick wad of gauze against the angry red hole. Nikolai hissed through clenched teeth, his abdominal muscles seizing under her hands. "Sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize." Nikolai ground out, his eyes locked on the ceiling. "Just stop the leak." For the next hour, Irina became a nurse. She had no training, but necessity is a brutal teacher. She handed Stephen instruments. She swabbed blood. She held the retractor, while Stephen dug out fragments of the cashmere sweater from the wound channel before stitching it closed. Nikolai took the pain with frightening stoicism. He didn't scream. He barely groaned. He just gripped the edge of the leather bench until his knuckles turned white, watching Irina the entire time. When it was over, Stephen set up an IV drip of antibiotics and fluids. "I need to secure the perimeter and arrange for new transport. We burned the G-wagons. Can you watch him?" "Yes," Irina said. Stephen left. The penthouse was deathly quiet. Irina sat on a stool next to the bench. Nikolai was bare-chested, a stark white bandage wrapped around his torso. He looked vulnerably human now, the formidable armor of his suits and his reputation stripped away. He turned his head to look at her. He seemed lucid, the fluids already helping combat the shock. "You did well in the pit," he said, his voice rough. "I almost got us killed," she countered, wiping dried blood from her hands with a wet wipe. "If I hadn't challenged him." "If you hadn't challenged him, he would have shot me in the knee 5 minutes earlier and taken you as a parting gift. You bought me the time to checkmate him." He reached out his hand, covering hers on the edge of the bench. His skin was cool, clammy from blood loss. "You aren't a waitress, Irina. You never were. You were just playing dress-up." "I liked being a waitress," she said softly. "It was simple. Nobody tried to kill me over a side of ranch dressing." Nikolai let out a short, pained chuckle. "Complexity is your inheritance. Volkov was right about one thing. You have your father's eyes. Cold. Assessing. Don't compare me to him. Why, he was a legend. He was a monster who died alone in a trailer park because he was terrified of the world he built." Irina pulled her hand away. "Why did you really bring me here, Nikolai? You didn't just need a translator. You knew who I was. You knew Volkov would recognize me. You used me as bait." Nikolai didn't deny it. He slowly tried to sit up. Irina instinctively put a hand on his shoulder to steady him. The proximity was sudden, electric. She was close enough to smell the faint metallic tang of blood mixed with his expensive oud wood cologne. "I used you as leverage," he corrected. "There is a difference." He looked deeply into her eyes, and for the first time Irina saw something behind the icy facade that wasn't calculation. It was curiosity and hunger. "My business with Volkov wasn't just about coltan," Nikolai admitted quietly. "It was about information. Volkov knows where your father hid the rest of what he stole. The 3 million was just pocket change. The real treasure was a digital ledger. Names, bank accounts, political bribes spanning 20 years. Irina stared at him. "My father didn't have anything like that. We lived paycheck to paycheck. Because he couldn't access it without alerting the Bratva. He died sitting on a gold mine he couldn't touch." Nikolai leaned in closer, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his stitches. "Volkov thinks he knows where the key to that ledger is. He thinks your father left it to you." The realization hit Irina like a physical blow. The phone call in the diner, her sister, the men hunting them. It wasn't just old grudges. It was about a fortune she didn't know existed. "I don't have it," she whispered. "I know," Nikolai said. "Because if you did, you wouldn't have been serving me whiskey for minimum wage." His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The air in the sterile bathroom became suddenly charged with a different kind of tension than the catacombs. It was the raw, desperate energy of two people who had just cheated death together. "You're not safe anywhere, Irina. Not anymore. The moment you spoke in that diner, you lit a flare. Volkov will hunt you. Others will hunt you. So what do I do?" Nikolai's hand moved up to her neck. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a possessive, dangerous caress. "You stay with the only monster strong enough to fight off the other wolves," he whispered. "You belong to me now." Before she could argue, before she could decide if she was terrified or relieved, he pulled her down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It tasted of blood, adrenaline, and a terrifying promise of ownership. And God help her, Irina Ivanova kissed the devil back. The sun was blinding as it bounced off the snow-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps. The Bombardier Global 7500 began its descent into Zurich Airport. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted tectonically. Nikolai was resting in the lie-flat berth, his movements stiff but functional. The antibiotics and the suture work Stephen had performed were holding. But it was Irina who had changed the most. She sat by the window wearing an oversized cashmere sweater Nikolai had provided, watching the world tilt below her. The waitress from Chicago was dead. Her corpse had been left in the damp catacombs of Paris. The woman sitting in the leather seat was someone else entirely. The plane taxied to a private hangar where a convoy of Audi A8 security vehicles waited. These weren't just cars. They were VR7 class armored fortresses. "We go straight to the clinic," Nikolai said, buttoning a fresh shirt with a grimace. "Your sister is already there. My team moved her while we were in the air." Irina looked at him. "You move fast." "Speed is survival." The drive to the Dolder Grand, a castle-like hotel perched above Zurich, was silent. Nikolai checked his phone constantly, monitoring the fallout from Paris. Volkov was quiet. Too quiet. That meant he was regrouping, likely calling in favors from the Chechen syndicates. When they arrived at the hotel, Nikolai bypassed the front desk. They had the entire top floor, the Maestro Suite. It was a sprawling masterpiece of luxury, with a terrace that offered a panoramic view of the lake and the city. Stephen stationed guards at the elevators and the stairwell. The suite was a fortress. Nikolai poured himself a water, his hand shaking slightly, the only sign of weakness he allowed. He walked to the terrace doors and looked out. "Volkov will come for us." Nikolai said, his back to her. "Not today. Maybe not next week. But he will come. He wants the ledger, Irina. And he thinks I have the key because I have you." Irina walked over to the minibar. She opened a bottle of sparkling water. The sound of the gas escaping was loud in the quiet room. "He's right," she said. Nikolai turned slowly. "About what?" "About the ledger." Irina took a sip, the cold water soothing her dry throat. "My father didn't just leave me debt. He left me insurance." Nikolai's eyes narrowed. The romantic haze of the safe house was gone, replaced by the sharp, calculating gaze of the businessman. "You told me you didn't have it. You said you were broke." "I was broke," Irina said, walking toward him. "Because I couldn't access it. Not without triggering an alert." "My father was a paranoid man, Nikolai. He didn't trust banks. He didn't trust holes in the ground." "Where is it?" Irina stopped a few feet from him. "Do you remember the car my father died, working on the 1969 Ford Mustang Fastback?" "I read the police report." Nikolai nodded. "It was a rust bucket. It was his life's work. He spent 10 years restoring it. When I was a girl, he taught me every part of that engine. Every bolt, every valve." She tapped her temple. "He made me memorize the firing order, the torque specs, the serial numbers of the replacement parts." She paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle. "The ledger isn't a book, Nikolai, and it's not a file on a hard drive. It's a sequence, a numeric key derived from the serial numbers of the engine block and the transmission of that Mustang. He made me recite it every night before bed, like a prayer. I didn't know what it was until he was dying. He told me it was the key to a blockchain wallet. A wallet that hasn't been touched in 20 years. Nikolai stared at her. He was stunned. The complexity of it was brilliant. No raid, no torture could extract a physical key that didn't exist. It was locked inside the mind of a girl who had vanished into the American Midwest. "Billions," Nikolai whispered. "We are talking about billions in leverage, political secrets, blackmail material on half the Kremlin. And the Volkov family," Irina added. "That ledger contains the proof that Volkov skimmed off the top of the Vori's central fund in the 90s. If that information gets out, Volkov isn't just ruined. The council will hunt him down and cut him into pieces." Nikolai laughed softly. It was a sound of genuine admiration. "You were sitting on a nuclear bomb while serving pancakes." "I needed a delivery system," Irina said, her voice dropping to a steel whisper. "I couldn't use the key alone. I needed someone with the network to decrypt the wallet and the muscle to protect me when the alarm bells went off. I needed a partner." She took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "I didn't slip up in that diner, Nikolai." The silence that followed was heavy. Nikolai froze. "The phone call," he said slowly. "You answered it on speaker." "I knew who you were," Irina said. "I saw you walk in. I knew you were the only man in Chicago powerful enough to stand up to Volkov. So I made a mistake, a loud Russian mistake right in front of your table." Nikolai looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. He wasn't looking at a victim anymore. He was looking at a mastermind. "You played me," he murmured. "You used me to extract you." "I hired you," she corrected. "The price was my safety and my sister's life. And now, a partnership." She reached out and adjusted the collar of his shirt, her touch gentle but possessing a newfound authority. You have the network. I have the code. We destroy Volkov, we take the money, and we run the table. Nikolai Draken, the man who moved nations on a chessboard, realized he had been outmaneuvered, and he had never been more attracted to anyone in his life. He caught her hand. He pulled her close, ignoring the pain in his side. You are a dangerous woman, Irina Ivanova. I'm a Ivanov. She smiled, a cold, beautiful expression that promised the world. We don't do safe. Nikolai walked to the table, picked up his phone, and dialed a number. Stephen, he said, his eyes never leaving Irina's. Cancel the flight to London. We're staying in Zurich, and get me a secure terminal. We have a wallet to open. He hung up. Outside, the sun set over the Alps, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The waitress was gone. The refugee was gone. Irina stood on the balcony of the world next to the devil in a tailored suit. They weren't just survivors. They were the new kings and queens of the underworld. And the game had just begun. And just like that, the waitress who poured coffee for $3 an hour became the most powerful woman in the criminal underworld. She didn't just survive the game. She rigged it from the very start. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? The quiet person serving your drink, the face you ignore in the crowd. What secrets are they carrying in their head? What wars are they fighting while you check your phone? Camilla Evans is dead. Long live Irina. If you enjoyed this twist-filled saga of mafia romance, betrayal, and high-stakes power plays, smash that